For they have been here many days, but they have no tongue with which to speak, but they have one of God's ways to sing. Jericho's walls would testify of faith's obedience. When they heard the trumpet sound with a shout, as they heard the trumpet sound, yes, it was the call. But when they say, for they have been here many days, but they have no tongue with which to speak, but they have one of God's ways to see.
In your lessons, you see that the title is Faith is the Victory. And that is true in our spiritual life, but it's true in this case as well with the Israelites are told to march around the city, and we know that story pretty well, and our children probably know it, but we need to reinforce our minds. And I wanted to give you some material that kind of surrounds that topic. These first few chapters, so what chapter is actual going around the city accomplished? What chapter in Joshua? Joshua 6, but we've been back in chapter 2, and some of the things we see in this lesson take us back to Joshua, the first chapter, where Joshua himself is prepared to lead. Did he have to have faith? He had to be strong, and we see that first chapter, I'm going to be with you. No one will be able to stand against you, and you will indeed, he'll indeed glorify God among the people on this particular occasion. We have some discussion questions. We'll follow that as we go through the material. And one of the first question is helping us understand the topography, the geography of that's where the city of Jericho is located. If your eyesight is good, you can look at the map I provide you. Jericho pops out. Is it on the east side or the west side of the Jordan River? The west side of the Jordan River. And where the people are on the east side when the story that we're looking at opens up. God is preparing them as they will indeed cross the Jordan River, and then they'll be ready to go to Jericho. How far is Jericho from the Jordan River? Not the Dead Sea, the Jordan River. You know, that was extra credit. See if you went to the website. I'm going to prepare for this class. He didn't tell me what the Jordan River is. Where is it? I looked it up. If you Google it up, it'll take 21 hours to travel from Jericho to the Jordan River. I knew that must be Jericho, Texas or something. But you look at a map and you finally get to the old Jericho that you're wanting to talk about. It's about 5 miles. 5 miles west of the Jordan River. How far is it from the Dead Sea? It's about 6. So it's very close to the Dead Sea. Why is the sea dead? Salt, and there's no life there, and it's very low. And Jericho is the lowest city in the world. How far below sea level does your material here say it is? So you'll go with 820, 840, but 825. Let's say it's over 800 square feet. It's 800 feet below sea level. How far up is Jerusalem according to sea level? You have real good eyesight. Let's say 2,500 feet above sea level. So in the 20 miles from Jericho to Jerusalem, we're looking at a rise in elevation up to Jerusalem as over 3,000 feet. And then in a short space, that's a pretty big rise. And you wonder why in the Bible, and we see in Luke the 10th chapter and verse 30, that indeed Jericho is north of Jerusalem on a map, but it's lower. So I go down to Jericho from Jerusalem. That's the way our story of the Good Samaritan. Was Jesus not correct in his geography? No, you're traveling that land. You will be going down even though you're going north. And the Bible is very accurate when it speaks about how things going down and going up. But there's the point. Here is Jericho, the lowest city in the world, which is interesting to me, but 3,000 feet difference in sea level. That also means, And we talked about it yesterday. I think a observation cannot prove this, but it's an observation, and just from physics, that you realize the water table, therefore, is going that way. And you wonder why Jericho was a walled city right out here in the wilderness of Judea, and why it might have been important to have a wall around it. And my suggestion yesterday is because there was a spring, the water that would come down from these mountains. It's near the mountains. It would form a spring there in Jericho, where the city is, and you put walls around that because you got something that's special. Now, water may not mean that much to you until you're out of it. And when you control water, you control the people, don't you? And there's the times in which there was Arabs in there, and the enemies would come through. At the time of the city of Jericho that we're looking at, there were probably 2,500 people. Modern Jericho, there's over 20,000. But it's interesting that modern Jericho has a reservoir in this, where old Jericho was, and it's a large reservoir, and to make that, they had to dig through the outer wall of ancient Jericho to build the roads that go through there. So they have a reservoir there. At this time, they probably just had the water collection spring that provided for that, and that was protected by an outer wall and an inner wall. Let's talk about that for a moment. Look at your second page. You see not only the elevation there that we've talked about, but go to the third page. At the bottom right-hand corner, you see a cutout. And we think about the wall of Jericho, but sometimes it's the walls of Jericho that are talked about as well. And so you're marching, you're down here in the valley, and here Jericho is built up, even though it is the lowest city in the world as far as elevation is concerned. But you do have a valley, and you had a retaining wall. That first lighter colored brown there is a retaining wall that we notice here was like 12 to 15 feet high. That's to retain all of the ground that's pressing against it. It was 12 to 15 high. On top of that, right by that, is indeed this outer wall that we're looking at. Now, the retaining wall was 12 to 15 feet high. Then on top was a mud brick wall. This is our first wall that we're talking about. It was 6 feet thick, while the retaining wall was like 12, but 6 feet thick, about 6 to 8 meters, or 20 to 26 feet high. So you got a 12-foot high retaining wall. Right by that, right next to that, we'll have that first wall, and it's going to 20 to 26 feet high. Then you see what looks green to be. You see this particular section then divided, and it is on an upward slope. And when they have excavated that, they found plastered rocks. Plastered. When you plaster something, does that make it good to march up on, or pretty slick? I think they made it to be slick. They have found that in this particular area, where indeed it'd be hard for an army to approach or the enemy to approach, because there's the earth, and it has a retaining wall, has a first wall that's pretty high, but this, at the end of this particular section of plastered rock, is then that larger wall. And it goes 46 feet high, 14 meters above the ground, outside the retaining wall. So if you're down here in the valley, you're looking at 60 to 70 feet high up there, and there's your wall. And what has happened is that wall crumbled, that wall, the big wall, crumbled. So where does gravity take the rocks? Takes them on down. And of course, this wall crumbled too, but they go against the retaining wall, and they have found rocks in that particular area or stones, that they think that's exactly what happened. How does the Bible describe what is going to happen? Let's look at Joshua 6, because this is going to be important in a moment for the instructions. Jericho was straitly shut up because the children of Israel, none went out. Now, we talked about this yesterday. Half of a battle is when your enemy's afraid of you. What caused them? It was shut up because the children of Israel. Why were they shutting up the main gate, but they were shutting up that city? Nobody's getting out. Why did they do that? He said, because the children of Israel. What had they learned from the spies? They're afraid of us. We've seen what they did to Og and Shahan and the king of the Amorites. We saw that he divided the Red Sea, and they got out of Egypt that way, and now they're close by, and therefore they're scared. And he says, Jehovah said unto Joshua, see, I've given thy hand Jericho. I've given into thy hand Jericho. The walls are still up. But God says, I've given it to you. And what was to encourage them? Look, they're afraid of you. So that fear factor is working at the very beginning. But he says in verse 3, he shall compass the city, all the men of war, about 40,000, the Bible says, that were ready for war. About the city, and thou shalt do it 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. The 7th day, you'll compass the city how many times? 7 times on that 7th day. And the priests shall blow the trumpets. And it shall be that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down. My Bible says flat. I don't know what your Bible says, but it says it's idea of flat, meaning it's falling down in its place. And the people shall do what? They shall go up, every man straight before him. So when these rocks come down, they come over the plastered, they got the rocks all the way down to the retaining wall and probably beyond that. What did they have? Little slight slope. And every man could walk straight into the city. Walk up straight into the city right before him. That is the Bible. If we say the Bible is accurate, and then you begin to look at evidence, that's exactly what took place and what they could find. Another thing that we'll see is that it was what time of year, and we'll talk about that in the questions. But from the very beginning, do you have indication of what time of year this was when the conquest took place? You'll see it, Joshua 4, and this is, again, how God establishes things. What time did he pick for them to cross the Jordan River? It's when the waters were flooding. That was usually springtime. That was usually harvest time. And that was a time in which this took place. The waters were going to be divided from the north, from the south, and they're going to walk across that. Well, what time did they pick? I'd like to pick a place when the water's down. Now, that'd be for me to get something done like that. But that's no problem with God. He picked that time. You're going to see my glory, and he's shown it all the way through. But it was probably a time of grain. What's interesting to what they found in Jericho is that in the lower part of the city, that was part of the outer wall and the inner wall. That was usually for the working class. They had different pottery from the rich class, which were in the other wall. That was probably where the workers were. Rahab's house is upon the entrance into the city, probably from the north side. But there was that area, and so when they found pottery in the stratus of 1400 BC, what they can determine that's that time frame, they didn't find the pottery that would be connected with 1400 BC. So they determined there was nothing happening in 1400 BC, and from the Bible standpoint, Joshua did conquer it in 1400 BC. They say there's no evidence for that at all. And we've excavated the place. So you've got some that said this never happened, this is a story, this is a myth. But as they began to, especially in the latter part of the 20th century, they began to find pottery that represented the 1400 BC in the more richer part of town. They found that. And it would date it between 1400 and 1500 BC. You'll see in the first of here, you'll tell, well, it probably happened, Jericho probably was around 1200 BC. But what we're finding is, from the standpoint of what the Bible would be 1400 BC, and that would fit. And you know what was in the grain? I mean, what was in the pottery? Grain. Why? Because it's harvest time. Now, if Egyptians would conquer a city, and we know this from AD 70, they would besiege a city, and what was the purpose of besieging a city? Surrounding it with bulwarks, and nobody can come in, and nobody can get out. They don't want to get out, they're afraid of the enemy. But what would the enemy do when they besieged a city? We know this from other Bible studies. What's that? They would starve them to death. And they run out of food. And either they would give up or they would die. They found pottery full of grain. Secondly, they found pottery full of grain that's been burned. Did Joshua burn the city? Chapter 6, around verse 26. Did he burn the city after the walls came down or before? The walls crumbled in their place, and then he burned the city. And they found evidence that grain was there. It had been burnt in that particular layer that they're discussing that would fit the very details that the Bible sets forth. That indeed, they weren't starved to death. How long did it take for the city walls to crumble? On the seventh day, you march around it 7 times. Did it happen then? It didn't take 30 days to conquer the city. Besiegement that would take 2 to 3 years in ancient times, when they would say, well, they'll besiege for 2 to 3 years. 1 week, grain is there, walls crumble, city is conquered, the city is burned. And what we see in the evidence is that that still is true. But so you have this picture of the walls of Jericho, just having the picture that, hey, I got an outer wall and an inner wall, and it all crumbled in its place, and they could walk right in. And even if there was a problem with the plaster to the rocks to keep it slick, hey, they got some walls to come down on it. And I just think that's just interesting from what they have found out. Miss Kenyon, she was supposed to, one who had archaeologists wanted her to come on because he's dying, and you move on to come and verify the things that he found. And she would never go into that area. But after she passed on, they began to what the things that she found, that the city had to be burned after the falling of the walls. He had proven with what he had found with the grain and so forth. But she denied the facts about Jericho and Joshua 2. But she ignored facts that they'd already uncovered. She ignored it, but she didn't even mean to. She brought this point to her mind, which proved what the man had found when he found the pottery. That was part of 1400 BC, and it fits with the Bible story. Any comments about that? You kind of have a picture of the walls, the elevation of the city, why it from a geographic plan, a topography point, that it's not inaccurate that when you go from Jerusalem to Jericho, you're going down. We say, I'm going up to Dallas. No, I'm going up to Jericho from Jerusalem. No, you're always going down. And the city's up there, and it's pretty high. Question number 2. Besides the wall falling in Joshua's day, with what other important events is the history of Jericho connected? And I would just ask you, we won't go through this, but look on your page 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got a box there of the history of Jericho. Come down with me to 1400 BC to 586 BC. Here's a marvelous prophecy that indeed was fulfilled. Joshua is going to prophesy, chapter 6:26, that whoever rebuilds this city will do so, their firstborn build the foundation, your firstborn is going to die. You build the gate, your youngest is going to die. So here is in Joshua's time of 1400 BC, but we come down to the days of Ahab in 673 to 851 BC. Those are a lot of years in between. And what literally happened in 1 Kings 6:34, in the days of Ahab, when Hillel built Jericho, what happened? Well, let's go read it together. 1 Kings 16:34. Was Ahab a good king? No, he wasn't. And here is Hiel the Bethelite. He built Jericho. He laid the foundation with the loss of Abiram, his firstborn. He set up the gates thereof with the loss of his youngest son, Shechem, according to the word of Jehovah, which he spake by Joshua, the son of Nun. So here, was 600 years, roughly, in between time, that God's prophecy literally came true. Isn't that marvelous in the Bible? That we're looking at history, so well, that was just a coincidence. That's just a coincidence. But we see, no, it's not. It's God working. His providence is working to glorify himself. And one of the things it does, God's fingerprints on history because of fulfilled prophecy. Now let's take it into a focus here. You're the Israelites. And you come across, and we're going to see how he prepares them, but you come across and you're being told to march around this city one time with furniture that you have to trust. That represents the presence of God. What was that furniture? Ark of the Covenant. You got the priest. This is a religious type of thing happening. It's honoring the God, and it's just not soldiers. That's who's marching around. And you're in that city. You're scared to death of these people out here, but you're looking through those windows, and you're seeing that. And 1 day passes, 2 days passes, 3 days pass. About that time, news gets old, and you'll have broadcasters say, "I don't think anything's going to happen out here. Do you? Look at those crazy religious people." That's the mentality of our world. If it didn't happen right then, it ain't going to happen. 5th day, 4th day, 5th day, 6th day, and then the 7th day. What are these crazies doing? How many times they march around at that time? 7 times. By that time, you're saying, maybe we shouldn't fear these people. I just think they're crazy. They're just marching around. They're not doing anything. And there's that 75-foot high level that Israelites are looking at. They look up, and it hadn't crumbled yet, has it? Nothing's happened. And yet, you're acting upon pure faith. Nobody's ever heard of anything like this happening before. But your faith in God, your faith in Joshua, and how God has prepared your minds, you have to be on the matter of faith. Does faith will be proven to be right in time, but sometimes that time for waiting, is that tough on faith? Is that tough on you? When you believe, God, I know this is your promise, and I'm waiting. Waiting on the Lord is a hard thing to do. But think about this, that here's a case where something has taken time. These men, and one of the things we'll look at, the men were circumcised before this event. And they had time to heal. May that take 1.5 years for some. It probably didn't take that long. The time for the males, they're going to be fighting. It takes time for them to heal. They just waiting. And already, Rahab's already known events that have happened before, and this city's shut when they start coming. So there was question, but as time went on and nothing happens, it takes faith to stay faithful. And then they were told, I don't want you to speak a word. That's what he tells them, specifics. Don't you speak a word until that time when you hear the long sound of the ram's horn, and then you shout. And what happened when they shouted? The walls came down. What happened when he built the city of Jericho 700 years after the prophecy of Joshua? What came true? Literally, it came true. Here we are. Do you think people in your neighborhood look at you as crazy because every Sunday morning they see you drive out and go to church? Do you see many people in their nice go-to-meeting clothes at the stop sign with you on a Sunday morning? I see guys with boats ready to go, and I'm sure we look strange because we got dressed up, go to worship services. Not many people, and you're doing that day in and day out, Sunday, Wednesday. You're faithful to the Lord. And one day, do you believe that the Lord's going to come with a shout, and the world's going to be burned up, and we're going to be naked before God? Everybody that's alive the righteous is going to be transformed in the twinkling of an eye. Well, all the graves are going to be open. There's going to be a judgment day. You believe that's going to happen? I do. But time and time and time goes by and goes by and goes by. And it takes faith to say, I'll keep on serving God. I'll keep on serving God the way he teaches me to, because a lot of people want to relax what God says. And we change the way we do church. People like to change. They like to change things and do things differently. And we say, well, we've got to have authority for what we practice. Is that something popular today? No. And these stories like this remind me, especially this prophecy, God's promise to come again. He's not slack concerning his promise. He didn't plural. And that promise in 2 Peter is his coming again. And what were they doing in the days of the First Testament Christians? Peter says that they were mocking. Where's the promise of his coming? Everything continues as it was. Well, Israelites, everything's continued. I've been walking around it every day for 6 days. Now we're going to go 7. I can see brethren say, I think I'll quit. You'll go. And the enemy, nothing's happening. When Nehemiah builds the walls, are there people mocking them as they work? Yeah. So you got those. That is a problem on our faith, because we don't want to stand out in a way that's weird and it's not any foundation of reality. But what is our reality? God's our reality. Can't see him, but we see all the evidence. And we see that in creation. And these stories help us remind ourselves that faith sometimes is very difficult, and God puts us to the test. What did he say? And all the details of it. He's very minute in details. And that's what bugs people. You like to do things that are strictly details. You're important with God. He revealed it, that's where we're going to do it. And as time goes on, and we just keep being faithful, we may have an influence on those who wake up and say, I need to turn to God, or they may not. Why is the gate and the way to eternal life restricted? Why is it narrow and the way to destruction is broad? Why is that? Because people, first of all, aren't going to get in that restrictive way of the Lord and living a life of faith. But the broad way is that it will have some people who started, and they'll be in that broad way before it's over. Because it's hard. But your faith is the victory. Because what happens is that what God promises, what's going to happen? It'll come true. Literally true. 1 Kings 16:34. Joshua 6, literally The walls crumbled in front of them, and he walked into that city. And I just want us to walk into the city of heaven. And I encourage you, I don't care how people mock you or how people look at you, that doesn't matter. You want to live a life that's not weird, because you're living a life that I think people would love. Your families, your individual life, the caring heart, and the reason you do that is because you serve the Lord. That calls you to do difficult things that other people wouldn't bother to do. You stand out in a way they see your good works and glorify who in heaven? They don't glorify you, you glorify your Father, because they can come to realize what's the basis of this? You're crazy. Something hasn't happened yet. It will. And we've got to be faithful and in order to, because one day that will come to pass. So 1 Kings 16:34 is one that very important that happened to the city. Elisha, he dwells there for a while before he's taken up into heaven from Mount Nebo. That's another part that is kind of interesting that we see in 2 Kings 2:19 through 22. And of course, the Jericho that's there today is a different city than what we're looking at here. But those are the two events that are important, not just the walls of Jericho falling down. All right, we'll try to get through these pretty quickly because we've established some groundwork. How did God prepare Joshua and the three tribes? Tell me who the three tribes are that will be on the eastern side of the Jordan River. They start up there where Bashan is. That would be the half-tribe of Manasseh. That would be there. And then in between, going south, in the area of Mount Nebo, and that would be Gad, and then you'd have the Reubenites. Now, on the border between the Reubenites and Gad would be the ancient city of Heshbon, and that's where people will be dwelling. That'll be an important city. It'll be conquered by Israelites, but they will have their tribes on that side. Now, we're asking the question: how do you prepare those three tribes on the east side of the Jordan River to pursue Jericho on the west side of the Jordan River? And we'll just move through these quicker. How did he prepare them? He talked to them specifically, and he says, "You leave your children and your wives and all your flock. You leave that here, and you go fight. Cross the Jordan River in the land of Canaan. You fight for your brethren, and I will bring you back to this." Again, faith. You're going to leave your wife and children and that herd you've been building up to go fight a war? But they trusted Joshua. He was being led by God, and they had been prepared for that, and that's indeed what they promised. So, and did God fulfill that promise? Literally, he did. Question 4. How was the time of the year when the Israelites were commanded to cross the Jordan River used by God to increase the people's faith in him? I went to Joshua 4, where the waters at that time were over their banks. It's just a parenthetical statement in my Bible. Verse 15, and when they that bear the ark were come into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, for the Jordan overfloweth all its banks at the time of harvest. See, grains in the pot, vessels, all that's, Bible didn't set out to try to prove that as archaeological evidence. It just stated facts, that's what happened. And so the waters were overflowing, and it was harvest time at the time of when that was taken. You might want to pick deep summertime where the water's not so high, God. Nothing's too hard for God. So that was the time of year. Question 5. What two events occurred before the coming to conquer Jericho that exclusively connected Israel with God? I want to spend some time on that because we usually don't think about that with the walls of Jericho falling down, but that's how he prepares the people. And you might, in looking at this and studying it with others that are teaching today, you might have 3, and I would understand that. But on question number, I didn't have number of the pages, but page 3 at the top, the Israelites prepared to reap God's promise. So here they're instructed to sanctify themselves. Tomorrow the Lord will do wonders for you, we said in Joshua the 3rd chapter. But I want us to look at these next two paragraphs. What were they to do when they crossed the Jordan River and they bring these stones? What were those stones to be used for? Out of the Jordan River. Banks are overflowing, and they bring stones out of the bed of the Jordan River. What was that to be about? Was it a memorial? Memorial, remembering what God did for you when you came out of that. And then it was there for the children to ask. We see the second paragraph. And he applies that. What's the only memorial that we have in the New Testament? Only one. Every Sunday, don't we? We remember the Lord's death. Now, the men of war are circumcised, and then they are to observe the what? The Passover. That's before they go fight. And they were circumcised, they were allowed to heal, then they observed the Passover. What do those two items there, those two things that they were doing, did they connect them exclusively with God? Circumcision. Were Gentiles circumcised? No. The Jews were. That set them apart. What was the Passover? Everybody got to leave? Israelites left. And I think the third one, you could put the memorial stones. That surely connected them with God in a miraculous way. But when I was thinking about these two things that directly identified them with God, as God's people. I am blessing you. This is your connection with me. And during the wilderness wanderings, they had not been circumcised. The generation hadn't, so they did. That separated them from God's people. And then the Passover reminded them what he did, the Red Sea, but the Jordan River, he prepares them also with that as a memorial. And that becomes important. So that's what I was driving at. How high was the prominent wall of the city of Jericho? In your mind now, if someone asked you that on the street, what could you say? How many feet high? And you're down here at the bottom. You're going to look at it 60, 70 feet high. When you get the 40-foot wall up at the very top, overlooking the valley, and it's already 12 feet retaining wall and 20-foot outer wall, then you're looking that direction. So your eyes would be on what's the tallest, and it'd be 75 foot or 70 feet over your valley that you're standing in. And that's a prominent, and it was a prominent wall. Question 7, how did God's instructions through Joshua demand faith in God? We've kind of stressed that in my monologue, but did all of that take faith? Now, when I build something, you could probably shout and knock it down. But not the walls of Jericho. How thick were they? 12 feet, 8 feet thick, 6 feet thick. That would demand faith. And why did God do it? Because it's going to demand faith. Why does he make us pray? He already knows what we want. He already knows what we need. But what does he want from us? Faith. Do you trust me? That's why we pray. Question 8. How could the walls falling down allow each man to walk straight before him into the city? I've indicated that, but you got Joshua 6:5 and verse 20. They'll walk in everywhere in this place. Hey, we got a breach in the wall now. Let's all come on down here and get in. They fell in their place. Rahab's house is saved, but the walls crumble around there, and that's what we see there. Now, question 9. When do the walls of Jericho fall down by faith? And I hope you'll get Hebrews 11:30 in mind, but even though the story, did they happen before they shouted? When did the walls of Jericho fall down by faith? After they had marched one day, once every day for 6 days, 7 times. Naaman was to dip in the Jordan River how many times? 7 times. They went until the 7th time he came up clean. Very specific. But it was not until they had expressed their obedience that something could happen by faith. That's the point. Hebrews 11:30, the walls of Jericho fell down by faith. Is that true? By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after it was compassed about for 7 days. We know what happened on that seventh day. They shouted. This is a great lesson on, as we'll see in these questions, to help us understand God's grace, our faith, our obedience, baptism. Which statement is most accurate regarding the fall of the walls of Jericho? By grace alone? Was grace involved? We just read it a while ago. Joshua 6, I have given you the city. Who gave it to him? God. Is that grace? I've given you this. No, it's still here, and we're marching around this thing. No, I've given you the city. That takes faith. That's grace. Was it faith alone? You can believe you're going to march around the city all this time, and you're going to shout, and we'll just see how long it takes for the walls to come down. Just go out there and do it. Go around this building, and it's not as thick a walls as Jericho, and you just march around that thing. You see why I'm saying people think you might be silly and crazy? But your faith, it's not faith alone either. Can we say by grace through faith it happened? That'd be a possibility? That would fit, would it? God has this, He's promised it. This is what He's going to give us. We couldn't earn it. Especially the conditions He gave. It took faith to do that. What about obedience of faith? What about E, both C and D? Could those be two accurate statements? What happened in Jericho? Why aren't they happening in your life with God and our obedience to the gospel? It's not faith only. It's grace through faith, and that faith is obedience of faith. And Rahab is mentioned in James 2 when she was justified by her works. Her faith acted, and that's what makes faith saving. When one is saved by grace through faith today, does it happen before baptism, while you're being baptized, or without it? Remember in Acts 10, when the Gentiles are hearing the gospel for the first time, God sends His Holy Spirit upon them directly from heaven. He sends His Holy Spirit directly upon them and gave them the gift of speaking in tongues. People say, they're saved, man. They're saved. But then, how can you forbid water that the Spirit has fallen on to forbid water for them to be baptized? And what did they do? They were baptized. And then you go to chapter 11 of Acts, you'll say, well, what was the purpose of giving them that miraculous Spirit? It wasn't to show they're saved. He'll tell you is that God had granted them repentance unto life. They were allowed to repent and be baptized so they could become what? Alive. Because they were dead in their sins. So it happens at the point of baptism. There's no doubt about it. When we're raised to walk in a newness of life, we are saved by grace through faith. That's when it happens. Just when they had marched around it again 7 times, didn't speak a word, did exactly what God said do. When it came time to shout, they shouted. And that's when the walls crumbled down. I think it's a great illustration of helping people see when, at what point are we saved from our sins. And that becomes very important. I heard a preacher, he preached a whole sermon on an experience that he had. I'm granted that he had it, that he came to the ER room, young boy who had a scholarship to play basketball at Kentucky, had a car wreck, and he was in a coma. And he was coming in and out of things, and he was talking to the preacher, and he wanted to know, am I saved? That's what the young man wanted. Wow. And he didn't have confidence in his salvation. So the story ends there, and he begins to preach. So he wants to tell everybody else about their salvation, and so he used colors and preached a sermon on colors. We sing a song, the crayon song. Red is for the what? Blood, and that's our blue is for his royalty. Well, he preached a sermon like that. But it dawned on me, when you receive Jesus as your personal Savior, I'm just assuming, is that how the man came to faith? One day he accepted Jesus as his personal Savior, and you're saved. You say the sinner's prayer and you're saved. That's not what we find in the Bible. And what made me appreciate, either you meet the conditions that God says to be saved or you don't. Either you repent or you don't. Either you confess Jesus to be the Son of God or you don't. Either you're baptized and say, God, thank you. I knew the hour. I knew the time when I was saved. When was that? It's when you were. When I was baptized, my faith had brought me to Christ to confess him and to be baptized, and you will never forget that. That boy never experienced anything. He wasn't taught that. Baptism was just a sign of something that already happened. He won't know if it really happened. And God never saves any person today before baptism. It's always after. And that's why in the Bible you'll read, after they were baptized, they went on their way what? Rejoicing. Because they knew that's the moment. I've been united with him in his death. I'm raised because my faith in God, he raised him from the dead. My sins are washed away. He's cleansed me by his blood. My guilt is away. I can walk and start walking joyously. It's obedience through faith. God's grace is there. We couldn't save ourselves just by getting wet or baptizing ourselves in grape juice. We could do that. What does grape juice represent? Blood of Christ, baptized in his blood. Let's do the real thing. It's all symbolic anyway. And but he said water. And if you have been Jericho, they had a bunch of water, didn't they? Other places wouldn't have so much. But even traveling the eunuch, they found water because that's where people have life. You got life, you got water.
We are VBS to say goodbye. We are VBS to say goodbye. The treasures that were taught from the Bible they were taught. We are VBS to say goodbye.
Goodbye until tomorrow.